Now, the political tensions over the war in Syria are reaching new heights this weekend, with the G7 countries, including the United Kingdom and the United States, facing off against Russia. The Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, has cancelled his trip to Moscow today. So where is this all heading? Well, I'm joined in the studio now by the co-chair of the parliamentary group Friends of Syria, Andrew Mitchell. Thanks very much for being with us on the programme today. Now, the Defence Secretary has said that Russia is guilty by proxy for some of for all of the deaths that we saw in this devastating chemical attack in Syria earlier this week. Is he right?
Yes, he is. And the appalling attack which we saw, could not have taken place without either the active support or the passive acquiescence of Russia.
You've been a very fierce critic of Russia's role in Syria in the past. We can have a look, actually, at something you said about Russians' actions in Syria last year. You said, "We are witnessing events that match the behaviour of the Nazi regime in Guernica in Spain." So do you stand by that Russia is acting in a way similar to the Nazis?
Absolutely. In the same way that the Italians and the Germans destroyed the League of Nations in the 1930s, Russia has completely undermined international humanitarian law. After all, the Chemical Weapons Convention, which I think took place in the 1920s, survived the whole of the Second World War. No one used chemical weapons, and now we have chemical weapons being used. Absolutely appalling, because, of course, the Russians told the international community that those weapons were being dismantled and removed. And here they are, available to Syrian forces in Syria today.
So was Boris Johnson right to cancel his planned trip to Moscow, or is it better for him to be there, look them in the eye and actually tell them face to face about what they should be doing?
Well, I think, Boris Johnson makes his plans, and he's in a much better position to judge whether he should be in Moscow today than I am. But the fact is that the international community has been outraged by the behaviour of Russia and the Syrian government regime over the last 5 years, and thank goodness the appalling error of judgment that was made by President Obama in saying that there were red lines which could not be crossed, and then doing nothing when those red lines were crossed, which sent a signal to Assad and to Russia that they could do what they want. Thank goodness that President Trump, I wouldn't have voted for him had I been an American at the last election. But thank goodness he has reasserted the importance of international humanitarian law. He said that he will not stand for war crimes being committed, and has acted in the way that he did.
So you're praising Donald Trump for that decisive airstrike. On the other hand, we have reports out today that Boris Johnson is going to be trying to get a strongly worded, hard-hitting statement about Russia from the G7. So while America is backing military action, we're trying to get a strongly worded letter. I mean, is that enough?
Well, America is the one country that could take the action which was taken. I think that President Trump was decisive. I think he was proportionate, and I think he was absolutely right to do what he did. And all of us, actually, not just the poor people in the cities in Syria, but all of us around the world can sleep more safely as a result of international humanitarian law being reasserted and the world's main superpower standing up for that, which they weren't before.
Should the UK be prepared then to back the US militarily?
Well, the UK should be prepared in an alliance with our allies, with America, hopefully with the UN as well, though that is extremely difficult because of the veto structure that exists there. Hopefully, the international community will now say that we simply cannot stand by and allow international humanitarian law to be broken. But let's be clear, what is required in Syria today is a ceasefire, unfettered access for humanitarian agencies, a ceasefire that we were told would be brokered and secured by Russia, Iran and Turkey, and that's what we now need to see. And the critical thing is to hold the Russians to their commitment on the ceasefire, that they will police it and deliver it in every way they possibly can, and not, as I say, be passively acquiescent in regime attacks on innocent civilians.
The difficulty is, though, isn't it, that in the Syrian conflict there doesn't really seem to be a good side to back. You have Assad on the one hand, who, by all accounts, is carrying out these devastating chemical attacks on his own citizens. But then on the other hand, you have an opposition that is heavily infiltrated by Islamic State. If you attack Assad, are you just helping Islamic State? What
we need is this ceasefire so that negotiations can take place. Those negotiations need to be from the bottom up. You're quite right that there are 50 or so different parties in this conflict in one way or another. And it's not for us to decide what a peaceful outcome should be. But what we can say is that we will not stand by and allow innocent civilians and children to be murdered in the way they have been in Aleppo and in many other places in Syria as well.
In this conflict that's gone on for many years. Thousands of people died, children, we've seen chemical attacks, we've seen the appalling events in some of these cities. How much responsibility does the UK and UK politicians bear for standing by, for not backing, for example, in 2013 military action?
Well, in my view, that was a terrible error of judgment by the House of Commons. And I think, hindsight is a great thing, but those of us who were passionately in favour of Britain standing up then against these abuses of international humanitarian law, I think we're right. We weren't able to carry the day. We weren't able to persuade our colleagues of the importance of that. And I think when we look back, we will say that the international community has been supine in the face of the most extraordinary barbarity that's taken place in Syria and done nothing about it. But again, I think a lot of the blame for that was that an American president said that he would take action if red lines were crossed. Chemical weapons were then used for the first time in this sort of state way since the 1920s, and he did nothing about it.
At the same time, though, taking action now, when the picture is more complex than perhaps it was in 2013, that risks confrontation with Russia, doesn't it? I mean, things could get very, very messy indeed.
Well, I think this is a proportionate reaction to what happened. And I think it sends a very clear message to the Kremlin that they cannot break international humanitarian law. And that's extremely important. It's not a declaration of war against Russia. We're standing up for international humanitarian principles.
OK, Andrew Mitchell, thank you very much for your thoughts today.